Welcome to the second episode of the series on Pep Talk from Arca Leadership. Arca Leadership is a movement to inspire people to become authentic leaders. In this series of conversations, we bring you face to face with leaders who live and breathe authenticity. That is, they're genuine, they live their values, and they earn the respect of people by being who they are. Our guest today is Vanessa D'Souza, who is the CEO of the well-known NGO SNEHA, and she has been there since 2013. Prior to that, she was with the Citibank Group, where she worked across a number of divisions, and her last assignment was as the director of the private banking group of Citigroup. She was also the winner of the Citicorp Chairman Award for Excellence in 1989 for exemplary performance. She holds a bachelor's honors degree in economics and a postgraduate degree in management with a specialization in marketing. Vanessa pursued the Management Executive Development Program at Stanford University, USA. She also holds a postgraduate diploma in public health nutrition. She was a DASRA Social Impact Fellow in 2015, and she has been a recipient of the Mother Teresa Social Leadership Scholarship to attend the Strategic Perspectives in Non-Profit Management program at Harvard Business School. Exemplary CV. Welcome, Vanessa, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. I'm honored to be on your panel.
So to start the conversation, the first and the most obvious question, what was the trigger that influenced you to move from the corporate world of Citibank to an NGO?
So, Rajiv, it's quite, I would say it's serendipity. It isn't like, I woke up one fine day and thought, what am I doing in the corporate world? I need to go and change the world. It didn't happen that way. I worked with Citi for 21 years. I then decided, I call it the midlife crisis, where, I wanted to try and do something different with my life. And I decided to just take a break and explore because, while you're working, you don't have time. And during this time that I was taking a break, the founder of SNEHA, Dr. Fernandez, called me and said, we're a group of doctors running this NGO. And we need help to fundraise for the NGO. We don't know how to fundraise. So, two of the board members have recommended you because they happen to know me. And I said, okay, I told her, I said, I have no clue what this is about, public health, working in the social sector, but I do know how to fundraise because, I was a private banker. And I recall the first time I went for a site visit because, I needed to understand what the organization was doing. And at that time, SNEHA was running one of the largest malnutrition programs in the country in Dharavi. It was one of the largest urban malnutrition programs. And, my office was at BKC, a stone's throw away from Dharavi. So, I went to, for me, Dharavi was, in the city and, no big deal. But when I entered Dharavi, and our centers were very, very deep into the slums of Dharavi, I was truly taken aback. I could not imagine that in a city like Mumbai, being the financial capital of this country, there were people that were living lives that, honestly, even animals shouldn't live like that, right? They were small, rooms, 7-8 people crowded in there, no water, use of common toilets, about 1,400 people per toilet seat in Dharavi. I mean, these were just unbelievable, right? Then we actually went to the daycare center. So this, first of all, shook me up. Then we went into the daycare center. And when you think of going and seeing a daycare center with children, you imagine these nice, bouncy, smiley, active children. What I saw really shocked me. There were these children who were, up to 3 years of age. I saw a 2-year-old who could not lift her head. They were weak, they were listless because these were all malnourished children, right? And I think that kind of really disturbed me. And then, I began to realize that, each of us is really an accident of birth, right? We could have all been born over there. We were just lucky where we were. And therefore, what could I then do to actually make some kind of difference, even though I didn't have the skill set of an NGO, but what could I do in my own way? And therefore, I joined SNEHA as a volunteer. And I volunteered for 2 years, helping them to fundraise. And only after 2 years did I finally agree to take on the role of CEO. Even that was a trial. I told the founder, I don't think that, I'm qualified to be a CEO. I don't know enough about the sector. And we have real stalwarts working at SNEHA, people who've been there 15, 20 years, PhDs, masters in anthropology, it's quite intimidating. And I said, let me try it out for 3 months. And if it works, then I'll stay on. And of course, it was very interesting how it happened. We were at a donor meeting. And at the end of the meeting, the founder said, I'm sorry, I can't give you 3 months. You have to decide tonight, because one of the funders who funds our malnutrition program said that if you don't have a full-time CEO, we're not going to continue our funding. And, I certainly didn't want that kind of, sword on my head. So I said, fine, I'll continue. But I think by then, the 2 years of volunteering, plus the 6 weeks of being in the role, gave me some reasonable sense of what, what the role was about. And I decided to take a leap of faith. And it's 8.5 years now, and, I'm still going strong. So maybe I made the right decision.
Yes, you sure did, Vanessa. So what has been your learnings over the years, and how has this impacted you as a person?
Rajiv, the corporate world is totally different to the social sector. In Citibank, they always say it's the best university in the world. And I truly feel that, what I learned over there has helped me in life and certainly helped me in this current role. But the focus of any corporate sector is to make profit. And when you have to make profit, your objective is always numbers, revenue, etc. I think sometimes in that process, certain aspects like, emotions, etc., tend to get quite suppressed, right? But there are lots of technical skills. So, the ability to take risks, to work with very, very diverse teams. How do you manage, smaller teams? How do you manage large teams of professionals? I think those were things that I really learned at Citi. The social sector is very different. The social sector is looking at bringing about changes in human behavior, systemic changes, right? And therefore, there is a lot of emotion required when you need to bring about behavior change, right? And it's emotion that drives these people. They feel very strongly, they're very passionate about the issue, and that's why they're in this sector, right? Now, you cannot, you have to accept that emotions are part and parcel of this role. And therefore, you have to work with these emotions. And that was very difficult for me. I mean, sometimes I still struggle with it, after 8 years, because, for 21 years, the head ruled all decision making, right? Now I have to balance head and heart to make decisions. And that balance between head and heart is really, I think, a huge difference that I have find, from this sector, between the corporate and the social sector. The other thing also, I feel that there are many myths about the social sector, and a lot of perceptions about how this sector runs, what drives the sector, and I think many of those myths got busted. I think the one of the myths, for example, is that the social sector is very laid back. If you want a cushy job after a corporate sector job, move to the social sector. I tell you, Rajiv, I don't think I worked as hard and I've had as many sleepless nights in this social sector than I've had in the 21 years that I was in the corporate sector, right? Because the problems are different. You sometimes have to worry about a woman whose life is at risk because she's facing violence, right? Or a malnourished child, who needs immediate treatment and, a treatment that may be unaffordable, say a hole in the heart. There are very different issues. And that these are not issues that can be easily resolved, right? So I think that whole thing about, it being an easy sector is not there. It's also a very resource constrained sector. So you have to constantly innovate and try and work with the minimal resources compared to the corporate sector that probably is much more generous in handing out resources. The second thing is that, this is a sector which is very unprofessional. I actually think there are so many professionals who have chosen to give their lives to this sector. And I think it's very commendable, because the quality of people here is so admirable. And unfortunately, I don't think as a sector we've done enough to amplify what the quality of the people are. Yeah? And I think the third misconception that people have when they come here is that I'm giving back to the world. You're not giving back anything. I think what you do is you're getting in return, right? The amount I have gained personally, in terms of personal growth, professional growth, in terms of just being a more complete person, I think that's something that, took me by surprise quite a bit. So I think overall, if I have to sit back and look at my life, I'm really glad I had the corporate experience, because I do think the corporate sector has some very good systems, some good values, and those can be brought into the social sector. But I also think there is a lot to celebrate of the social sector that needs to be amplified, and that needs to be actually put out there so people can value the social sector a lot more. And that's how we will get more and more high quality people in the sector.
Very, very, very well said, Vanessa. Managing in a atmosphere of constraint, I think that's the most important thing. And choosing between the head and the heart, as you mentioned. So continuing our conversation, something about your values and your leadership style. How has your values and leadership style evolved over the years? And who are the people who have influenced you the most?
I think, Rajiv, I think one's core values don't change very much depending on, so my core values would be integrity. So when I say integrity, I don't just mean financial integrity. I mean integrity of whatever you're doing. Put your 100% into whatever you're doing. It is persistence and hard work. I think one of the things that I have learned is you can't do anything. There are no free lunches, right? You have to just work hard. You have to be persistent at problem solving. And I think that, again, hasn't changed. But I think one of the big differences, again, I think in the corporate sector, success is defined as, a good increment, a bonus, having good luxuries in life. Whereas success in the social sector is defined very differently. It is defined as what kind of impact you are making on people's lives, on bringing about systemic change. So the yardsticks are very different, right? So, and I think that many ways, what you measure is actually what you will end up doing, right? So if you measure systemic change, then that's what you're going to end up doing. But if you're measuring profits, then that's what you're going to put your energies into, right? So I think because the sectors are different and the motivations of the sectors are different, I think that definitely guides, your belief system, your values to some extent. I think one of the things about the social sector that I feel is very different from the corporate sector is, in the corporate sector, if you have a challenge, if you want to solve a problem, you start with what are the challenges, right? And how can I solve for these challenges? Actually, in SNEHA, we look at it very differently. We look at what's going right? What is right with the world? Where can we get that energy from? What can we strengthen? And in that process of discovering what is right with the world, you then start dreaming, because, you say, okay, in any situation, you will always have some things that are going right. So let's first recognize what's going right. Let's strengthen what's going right. Then let's dream about, what are the possibilities? And once you think of what are the possibilities, then you focus on, okay, now what are the gaps that I need to fill so that I can, aspire for these possibilities. So I think that approach is very different, which I have seen in the social sector. And I think that has changed one aspect of my values very deeply, where I do believe that, you start with possibilities of anything. You don't start with what are the challenges. And that brings in a lot of energy. It brings in a lot of a positive, a positive way of thinking, a positive way of approaching any situation in life, right? So I think that's one very core aspect that I think, I've seen difference. The second is in terms of equity. Unlike the corporate sector, equity is what defines the social sector. It's a very strong value in the social sector. And anything you do in the social sector, you look at through the lens of equity. I want to share two examples that happened just yesterday with me. We've rolled out a large vaccination, private sector vaccination drive in Dharavi. So yesterday was the first day. And, when we were brainstorming as to, how do we make sure that the people of Dharavi get covered? The questions that kept coming up were, how can we cover patients who are bedridden? How can we cover people who have, mobility challenges? How can we have people who have some special needs? How do we cover them? Now, this is not normally a question that, a question that ever would come up in the corporate sector, right? Yes, maybe as one of your last questions, you will have inclusivity, but I think here, this is a very dominant force. In a family, if the man goes to work and he's got vaccinated, how can we make sure that the woman, the mother-in-law, the senior citizens of that family are also covered, because they are the most vulnerable of the family, right? So looking at everything through the sense of equity is again, and this includes not just financial equity, it also includes gender. I mean, gender is something that, again, it was a relatively new term to me till I came to the sector. Right? So I think those are very different ways and perspectives of looking at things that probably I didn't, look at from the sector. And I think the third is, this whole idea of leadership is not about what you do, but about who you are, right? Because in the corporate sector, there is so much emphasis on achievement, right? And a very personal achievement, right? Whereas here, your achievement is linked to a change that you're making in society, right? And I think the change needs inspiration, right? And therefore, as a leader, I think it's really important to constantly focus on the kind of person that you are, because you are walking that talk. I know recently I was reading an article which I felt was so pertinent. It talked about the chief executive officer today being defined as a chief energy officer, right? And why do you need that in a pandemic? And I think that's so true of a sector like ours. We're a health sector working in a pandemic in some of the worst affected slums of this country, probably of the world, right? So places like Dharavi, Mankur, Govandi, Malwani. Not only are we doing our routine work of maternal health, child health, adolescent health, gender-based violence, but we also have to layer everything with COVID prevention, screening for COVID. Then you're looking at now COVID vaccination, right? So in this challenging environment, where does a leader get energy from, right? And I think every leader, and I keep telling my team that, we have to find that space, because, you have to do it yourself. Nobody is going to come and give you that space, right? You have to find that space. So one of the things that we do, we have what we call a Friday session. And on Friday, we put aside 1 hour for our personal growth, right? So those sessions are everything from meditation to mindfulness, to leadership skills, to collaboration, to basically it's an hour of self-reflection. It's an hour of it's a safe space for people to share, people to talk about things that they feel very strongly about, and things that worry them. And I think those sort of things is what brings people together. And, these kind of platforms is actually what builds leaders, I believe. So it's a very different way of looking at leadership. But I think that's another thing that this sector has given me the ability to explore very different aspects of leadership that probably I never thought of, in the corporate sector.
That's a learning for all of us, Vanessa, the CEO being the chief energy officer.
And it's true, Rajiv, I always tell my team that the reason we need to keep our energy levels up and our stress levels down is because when you're stressed, you make the wrong decision. Yeah. And I actually learned this from one of my professional coaches, Sharad Sakorkar. I don't know if you know him. So Sharad, after doing my MBTI and FIROB, he said, there's one thing you have to be very careful about is never letting yourself get overstressed, because when you are stressed, you tend to make wrong decisions. And when I began to reflect on my own life, I realized wherever I have been in a really in a stressed period over a period of time, that's when I made all the wrong decisions. Right? And I keep telling my team that we owe it to ourselves and to our teams to keep our energy up and keep our stress down. And that's why when we do these sort of things like Fun Fridays or the Friday sessions, it just gives us that space, that time to unwind, and with us, the senior team. So, you also build that, you're vulnerable, you build, vulnerability in teams, and that's how really trust and bonding builds up within teams.
Like all leaders, you must have also had your shares of and experience of failures and setbacks. What helped you to get over them? And what has helped you to stay grounded?
So I have to say my coach played a very important role in this, Rajiv, because, I think the most important thing is to accept, is to self-reflect and accept who we are, right? And to accept that nobody is 100%, right? We are all at 50, 60, 70, 80%, but nobody is at 100%, right? So I think that's the first realization that one must have. Yeah? And when you have that, is when you also begin to realize what are your weak spots, and therefore what do you need to be mindful of. I remember when I came into the sector, I came in with very different expectations of the kind of performance that I would get out of people, right? Or the kind of motivation that I would see from people. And sometimes I felt that I was maybe being too demanding, right? Or not too, maybe my expectations were too high, right? But this was also my own perception, right? It was a lack of understanding on my part as to where somebody else is coming from. I think one of the learnings that I had is you have to first step out of your own shoes before you can step into somebody else's shoes, right? And when you begin to do that, one of the things that I realized is when I can begin to think from the other person's perspective, I can think with empathy. I can, I can then make a much more balanced decision because I've removed my lens of judgment, before we started the conversation. So I think that was one big learning I had. The second big learning I had is being able to find time and space and being for myself, for my own reflection, and not rushing into decision making. Yeah? Sometimes I think you need in any role, you need to make certain decisions very quickly. And I am a quick decision maker. So for me to step back and take time to make decisions actually is an aberration, right? But it is important, I feel sometimes, to sit back, reflect, think before you make decisions. And again, that's something I have learned a lot at SNEHA, where, you need to wait to, first of all, take inputs from people, because, when you listen to people and listen to different perspectives, then I think you have a much more balanced decision making. And again, I've learned that from the sector. It's a very participatory sector. And participatory, way of working is part of the sector, right? But they take long to reach a consensus. But once consensus is made, then people move very fast at implementation. So I learned then that I have to sit back, I have to take everybody's inputs, and then you take people with you as part of the decision making and part of the change plan. Yeah? And I feel that was another very big learning for me. To be patient, to take everybody's inputs, and to actually consider that a value add to the change process rather than a waste of time.
I'm sure you must be coming across a lot of people in the slums. How do you rate their decision-making capabilities compared to what has been your experience in the corporate world?
Again, Rajiv, this I think stems from a very deep belief that there is a light shining in every person, right? And it is up to us to switch on that light or switch off that light, right? We start with a basic belief that there is value, there is talent, there is skills and competence in every human being, right? And it is our role to nurture that. I'll give you an example of the pandemic. So, overnight we all went into lockdown, and SNEHA has this huge force of about 7,000 volunteers who we recruit from the communities that we work in. We train them, and they all work completely pro bono, right? So we build in them that sense of responsibility and accountability to society, saying that, you live in this slum community. Therefore, you are responsible for the health, and therefore you need to take action to help your neighbor. It could be a woman facing violence, it could be a child needing immunization, etc. When the lockdown happened, overnight we were not in the field. And now suddenly the only people we had in the field were these, volunteers.
Volunteers,
But
yes.
these volunteers, the volunteers are not very tech savvy, because normally in the social sector, it's a lot of in-person work. It's, you're talking to them. It's a lot of personal one-to-one kind of counseling that you do. Overnight, we had to train them to use Zoom, make Zoom calls, how to get onto Zoom, Google Meet, how to send videos and messages on WhatsApp. And it's amazing how they learned overnight, and not just learned, they were energized by the learning. So one of the things we wanted to understand is, in this pandemic, when everyone was locked home, what is it that motivated these people to go out and support the public system? Because we had very few people that lived within the slum, but we had large numbers of volunteers. So our staff who lived over there, you couldn't travel, right? There was lockdown. So the staff who lived there were doing door-to-door screening with the public health workers. And these volunteers were supporting. And, in a focus group discussion, we asked them, what is it that motivated you to do all this? And it was very interesting. They said, for so many years, SNEHA has built our capacity and taught us so many things that we didn't know about health, about, about how to work with the public system. Now, when SNEHA needed our help, we have to stand up and push ourselves to be able to do what SNEHA was doing. And, for us also, it was really a test of our own model on how we can sustain work in communities by actually leveraging the power of the community. There is this never say die attitude. And if you think about it, Rajiv, look at the kind of constraints that these people live under, right? I have actually seen so much of wisdom, coming out of this community. I recall, we had a group from one of the largest IT companies in the world from Silicon Valley visit us. And there was a group of about 20 people who wanted to do a site visit. Now, given the high profile of these people, there were recce trips, etc. There was a lot of planning and a lot of investment of the team's time to make sure that this visit really went off smoothly. So at the end of the visit, there was this Q&A session with this group of 20 Silicon Valley people. And they were shooting a lot of questions at our staff. And remember, these are all field workers who are 10th, 12th standard pass, but they probably have wisdom equivalent to Silicon Valley people, right? And at the end of the whole session, they said, okay, fine, we've really, it was an eye opener for anyone coming from Silicon Valley to a slum in Manpur, right? And they said, okay, do you have any questions for us? And one of our community workers stood up and said, you've come, you've seen what we are doing here, and you've admired us. Now, what are you going to go back and do when you reach your hometown? And there was pin drop silence in the 20 people. I don't think they ever thought that question was going to come to them. But this is the kind of courage and of wisdom that lies within these communities. And I think we have a role, all of us, not just the social sector, all of us have a role to make sure that we actually tap on all that wealth of knowledge and wisdom that is lying within these communities for the betterment of not just the country, but probably mankind as well.
So that was incredible, Vanessa, about the wisdom of the people in these slums. So finally, a last question to you. What would be and that is for the youth of today, what would be 3 tips or learnings that you could pass on to the youth of today who want it all overnight, whether it is success, whether it is happiness, or whether it is impact?
So, I have to say, first of all, to the youth of today, what you want is utopia, right? But the real world is actually very different. And sometimes I feel that, life with its twists and turns shapes and, molds everybody, right? At the end of the day, you can't fight destiny and what happens, in your life. But I think, the youth of today is far more exposed than any of us ever was, right? Which is, I think, on the one hand, very positive. And the way I look at it is today, if we get so many youth wanting to engage with the social sector, it is because they are exposed. It is because they know that they are privileged, and yet, they're sensitive enough to say, let me see what I can do to contribute, right? And we do have a lot of youth that do come. In fact, if you see the average age of the social sector, it's quite young. I mean, and these are not all social workers by profession. You have people who are doing monitoring and evaluation, research, finance, HR, etc. So I actually think the youth of today is far more sensitive, and because they're exposed to what we were. One of the things the youth constantly wants is purpose. You keep hearing this word, I want purpose and I want meaning in my life, right? And purpose and meaning, I believe, comes from whatever you are doing, right? If you, in any role that you do, if you have autonomy and you can make your own decisions and your own mistakes and learn from your mistakes, right? If you are constantly learning and growing, right? And there's constantly a challenge for you, you will find meaning. And third is your role, whatever role you do, wherever you are, you must know that you are doing something for somebody else. Okay, constantly lifting yourself up to what what is the contribution you are making. And I'll tell you, Rajiv, even in my own role, people will say, oh, you're in the social sector, you should never have a problem with this. There are many times when sitting at my desk, very frustrated with, maybe raising funds for work, or maybe, some statutory requirements, or maybe even some inter-team issues, right? I sometimes question, what am I doing here? You get frustrated and wonder why you're at your role. It is at that time that I put my papers down and I actually go and make a field visit, right? I plan a field visit. And the minute I go into the field, it connects you with why you are doing what you are doing, right? And that, I think, gives you energy and gives you purpose and anchors you, right? So similarly, whichever role you're in life, if you know how that end consumer of your product or service is benefiting, and let's take it's a banking sector, okay? So, that's probably one of the hardcore sectors. But if I know that the role I'm playing is actually making the life of a consumer better, right? I think that will give me energy. So you don't have to be in a social sector to make a difference in the world. You have to find the change that you are making, and then you'll be able to find purpose and meaning in your life. But if you look at your job as, I just need to go in at 9 a.m. and leave at 6 p.m. because, I need to earn a salary, that's when you're going to have a problem with, purpose and meaning and satisfaction in your life. And I think the last point I'd like to leave is, it's a philosophy that I believe very strongly in. It's a Swedish term, actually. It's called lagom. Lagom is really about leading a balanced life, right? It's having a little bit of everything. And, if I think you're able to make sure that you have your career, you have your family, you have your friends, you have your hobbies, and lead a balanced life. I think that ability to balance yourself, anchors you in many ways. And I think the last message that I would give again is the most important thing. And again, there is actually a Harvard study that was done over 75 years to show that the most important thing in our life is relationships. Yeah? And I feel that the youth of today sometimes are so into technology that they're forgetting how to relate to people. Yeah? And if we're unable to build deep, meaningful relationships in our lives, right? I think at the end of the day, when you look back at your life, you really won't have much to feel good about. Yeah? So I would tell the youth of today, put those laptops, put those phones down sometime, and go out and build meaningful relationships with your family, with your friends, with society at large, because that's eventually in the long run what you will look back and hold yourself accountable to.
Finding meaning and purpose in your life, leading a balanced life, and giving importance to your relationships. Very well said, Vanessa. So thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.
I must say it's been a real learning experience and an inspirational experience for me. And I'm sure it will be the same for all the other viewers who are going to be watching this conversation. Thank you so much again for joining us, and all the best for your organization, and to you and to all your team members for taking the organization ahead. Thank you so much. You're doing incredible work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.